Welcome to Training for Inner Peace, Episode 6. For those of you who have been following me since the beginning, I think it would be helpful to begin with a review of where we've come so far. We started by talking about two types of awareness. The first being thought, which we all, of course, are very familiar with, and the second being presence, which is what we began to practice as we moved into episode 3 and 4. It's really important as we move forward to take this sequentially because it's unfamiliar with us. And as we increase familiarity with presence, we can go deeper into presence, but to jump straight away into the deep end of the pool without first learning how to swim can be pretty daunting. So what we did in the first practice is talked about the two types of awareness, thought and presence. And in the second episode, we talked about the importance of establishing a routine and how to do that. And then in episode 3 and 4, we had a couple of examples of how to bring ourselves to a witnessing presence. And in doing that, we placed ourselves either in a beautiful natural environment, or it was even okay to do it within our own, the confines of our own house. And rather than thinking about things, we just redirected our attention to our surroundings. What was the color of the light like? What aromas did we take in? We just brought ourselves to that very moment. And we began with very short practices, 3-minute practices, because it's hard to sit still and just bring oneself to presence without constant interruptions of thought. But hopefully, as you practice episode 3, and then the longer practices detailed in episode 4, which we took out to 10 minutes or beyond, you start to gain a familiarity with just relaxing into the practice with slow, deep, cleansing breaths, and then just simply being, just simply taking in the surroundings without being disturbed by what's happening yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. Then in episode 5, we deepened this practice, and I really call this part 2 of this 10-part series, by rather than a witnessing presence and just witnessing our environment and the things we could take in through our senses, we practiced bringing that presence to a single point of focus. In episode 5, we used a saying, or sometimes it's called a mantra, to bring our presence, rather than a wide focus, to bring it into a specific focus. And I think the phrase I used was, be here now. Be here now. And we simply repeated that phrase over and over as many times and with whatever cadence feels natural, to take that presence that was a witnessing presence and start to narrow it in to a very, very specific area of focus. So today, in episode 6, we're going to continue with that practice of narrowing our focus and bringing our presence to one particular point. So let's review how we initiate the practice. First, as you notice, I am no longer in a outside or in a natural setting. I'm in my office, and I have my back against a soft chair, and I normally have the lights dimmed, but that wasn't the greatest way to shoot a video, so I have the lights up a little bit, but I normally dim the lights. I have my meditation timer, which I recommended earlier is important, so we're not wondering when our 20 minutes, as I recommend the duration of this practice for, so we're not wondering when that time is up, and that in itself causing a distraction. And then it's very important to sit upright. And as I mentioned before, I like to place my my middle finger and my thumbs together. And again, I don't know why that seems to help, but placing those together in the traditional way and letting them rest softly in my lap just seems to help me focus more. And then as we begin the practice, we slowly take in a breath, release the breath, and take in the breath and release the breath. And don't be in a hurry about this. If you do this for the first 5 minutes of your practice, there's no issue with that. Just use it as a time to it's kind of like stretching before you begin a physical exercise. It's an opportunity to kind of slow everything down and just bring yourself to the presence. Now, where this episode 6 practice differs from the episode 5 practice is that rather than softly in our minds repeating a saying or a mantra over and over again, we're going to change this up. And with our softly closed eyes, we're going to immerse ourselves in watching the color on the inside of our eyelids or the light on the inside of our eyelids as we're breathing slowly in and out. Try to bring your complete attention and your complete focus to the light that you see on the inside of your eyelids. And just relax into that light. Now, what I notice when I do this is the light tends to change. It tends to dance around a little bit, and sometimes change intensity. And for me, and this may or may not be true for you as well, with my softly closed eyelids, the color of that light begins to subtly change. And these aren't bright colors, more like, you know, subtle northern light colors where they're subtle. And I notice that the colors sometimes go from red and orange and mellow into yellow or green. I don't know if that happens with everyone. I don't know if it'll happen with you, but it doesn't really matter. Even if you just see black and white, it doesn't matter because the exercise is focused on bringing your complete attention to the light you are seeing on the inside of your eyelids. And just relax into that light. As you continue to breathe, now thoughts invade your presence as they always do. Um, that's nothing to be worried about or be disturbed by. Just, notice a thought and then bring your attention back to the color. Watch it. See if it moves or changes hue or changes intensity. The key in this exercise is the shifting of attention from what was a very broad witnessing presence to a very focused presence. And the focus in this case is the light on the inside of our eyelids. This is the practice that I currently use and have been using for around 20 years. And I started this practice first using the verse and found that as I spent a few weeks softly in my mind repeating that verse and coming back to that verse when I was interrupted by thought, that my cadence over time and over a number of practices over a series of weeks began to slow down to the point where maybe I was only repeating the verse a couple times a minute. And then, quite naturally, as I continued the practice, focusing on presence, I began to watch the light on the inside of my eyelids. And I found that this really helped me. It helped bring myself to the moment. Now, when your meditation timer bell, soft bell sounds, don't jump right up, out of your erect seating position, but just maybe deepen your breath. Take several breaths in and out, and slowly open your eyes and bring yourself back into the day. Now, I present these practices, one episode a week, but we are now at the stage in our practice, in our training for inner peace, that it'll more than likely take more than a week to develop a level of comfort with these practices. So, even going all the way back to practice 3 or practice episode 4, spend time with those. And rather than jumping ahead, um, spend enough time with each of those practices so that you develop a level of comfort with them before you move on to the next practice. So perhaps you begin with the 3-minute witnessing present exercise, and extend that out to 10 minutes after a few weeks. And as that becomes more and more familiar, and as you find yourself being interrupted by thought, perhaps less frequently, try the focused practice using the quote or the mantra. And as that becomes more familiar and you find your interruptions from thought decreasing, go ahead and try this practice. What we are doing is first shifting our awareness from thought to presence, and then taking that presence, which at first was very broad and very multi-sensual, let's call it, and narrowing it in to a single point of focus. And I wouldn't be surprised if this, at this stage, would be something to stick with for, a month and a half or more. But give yourself a chance to acclimate to it and to be comfortable with it. Next time in episode 7, we'll talk about some of the things that I experienced as I initiated my practice. And hopefully, by sharing that experience, I can help you through some of the oh, obstacles or some of the things that I ultimately work through to deepen my presence. Thank you for joining me for episode 6. Really think that these practices will have a substantial impact on your life. I know they have for me.